You said about how we met. She and I met real quickly. Justin Baldoni's met her first at a club. She was dancing, salsa dancing, professional dancer. He then was like captivated by her person. They ended up talking. It wasn't a hit on. They went out to coffee. And then Justin basically, instead of saying, hey, what's your number? Let's hang out. It was more like, hey, I've got a group of people that are getting together talking about elevated concepts, spirituality, how to be better, how to serve humanity. There's a group of women that are talking about this kind of thing. Would you be interested in? Whoa, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not trying to like,
go to you.
Then she started coming around, and then she and I met shortly after. I like to tell the story that she hit on me, but she didn't. That she cornered me and was like, please take me out, take me out, take me out. And I was like, that didn't happen. Fast forward, we're becoming friends. We're doing these exercises where you kind of like look in each other's eyes for like as long as you can without blinking and like, go, whatever, all that stuff. And we are partnered up to, and in that moment, she likes to say that she saw me fall in love with her.
For real. No, I saw it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God.
But I could see that we had a thing.
Hi, friends. Welcome back. It's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. There's something quietly unraveling behind the glitz of Hollywood. Something that even the brightest smiles can't completely conceal. Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively, usually, poised and polished in the public eye, seem to be under unexpected pressure. A lawsuit filed by Justin Baldoni has thrown a shadow across their usually untouchable image. And from the way things are developing, it's clear they're doing everything they can to distance themselves from it. What's telling is Ryan's latest move. His legal team recently submitted a response opposing the motion to dismiss. And if you compare it to their previous tone, the difference is striking. Gone is the sharp edge, the overt disdain, the urge to paint Justin as the villain. Instead, this new response feels restrained, deliberate even. The fiery rhetoric has cooled. It's as if they've decided that fighting fire with fire may no longer be in their best interest. But within that more composed tone, there are still subtle hints. Small, revealing fragments that suggest not everything is as measured behind the scenes as it appears on paper. One can't help but wonder if this shift is strategic, or if it's a reflection of growing uncertainty in their camp. Then, almost as if time to deepen the intrigue, comes a new report. Blake Lively is allegedly beginning to regret filing the lawsuit against Justin Baldoni. Whether or not that's entirely accurate is up for debate. These kinds of insider claims often live in the blurry space between truth and speculation. But the fact that such a narrative is surfacing now, right, in the thick of the legal exchange, raises questions. What's really going on behind those closed doors? That said, I honestly don't know what to make of it. And maybe that's the point. Things are rarely as black and white as they seem, especially when layered beneath public relations and controlled narratives. But there's more to this than just the lawsuit. Blake Lively has also responded to actor Adam Manson, who recently spoke out about his experience on the set of It Ends With Us, a film that's already tangled in its own behind-the-scenes controversy. Her reaction to Adam's comments was sharp, unwavering. While he insists that everything on set was professional, that there was no discomfort and she behaved as if nothing was wrong, Blake painted a very different picture. She didn't backtrack or soften her stance. Instead, she doubled down, firm, in her belief that the situation was deeply uncomfortable from her perspective. And it's not hard to see why. When Blake discovered that the actor placed in such an intimate scene, literally positioned between her legs, was the best friend of the film's director, Justin Baldoni, the dynamics shifted. In her eyes, this wasn't just poor casting, it was a breach of trust, a deeply unsettling choice that made an already vulnerable moment on set feel calculated, even predatory. What makes this even more layered is the decision-making behind the scenes. Out of the countless actors who could have taken that role, it was Baldoni's closest friend who was selected. A coincidence? Maybe. But in this industry, where power and relationships often dictate who gets what role, the optics of it all are hard to ignore. Blake's reaction is being framed by some as overblown or overly sensitive. Yet, when you place yourself in her shoes, the discomfort begins to make sense. She wasn't just an actress performing a scene, she was a professional trying to navigate a space that suddenly felt compromised. And when those spaces are no longer safe, speaking up becomes a necessity, not a choice. Isn't it remarkable how something as seemingly procedural as a casting decision can unravel into a web of mistrust and emotional tension? We're talking about an actress who accepted a role in a film, knowing full well that the script included a birth scene. This wasn't sprung on her unexpectedly. It was clearly written, understood, and agreed upon long before cameras rolled. She was aware that her character would be giving birth on screen. A deeply emotional and vulnerable moment, yes, but one that comes with the territory in certain kinds of storytelling. And yet, now she's framing the presence of the actor portraying that scene, someone with professional credentials, industry recognition, IMDb credits, touring experience, and even a Master of Fine Arts degree, as something far more intrusive. She reduces him not to an actor performing his role, but to a man awkwardly positioned between her legs. It's a nubs-yours interpretation that, while emotionally valid from her perspective, also demands a degree of mental gymnastics to fully justify in the broader context of filmmaking. That was her response to Adam Manson, and frankly, it's one that doesn't carry a lot of weight for some observers. There's a sense that the emotional core of her argument, while genuine, may be clouded by the complexity of everything else surrounding the situation. Meanwhile, there's growing speculation that both Blake and Ryan are beginning to feel the burden of this escalating public tension. According to recent coverage by the Daily Mail, new photographs have surfaced showing the couple attending a horse competition in New York, where their daughter was participating. On the surface, it was a family moment, a slice of normal life. But beneath that calm exterior, there may be more than meets the eye. The report suggests that Blake is now quietly regretting her decision to pursue this lawsuit. She's said to be striving for some semblance of peace and routine, hoping to shield her family from the constant scrutiny. Yet over the past few weeks, that hope has been increasingly difficult to hold on to. Every step she takes seems to trigger a wave of criticism. Every gesture, every appearance is dissected and analyzed, leaving her in a state of ongoing vulnerability. It's as if her world has been tipped on its axis, and nothing feels stable anymore. And truthfully, when you're caught in the middle of a high-profile PR crisis, the very worst thing you can do is, in the world of public relations, one of the most risky moves you can make, especially while already in the eye of a storm, is to file a lawsuit. It rarely brings clarity. More often, it pours gasoline on a fire that was already difficult to contain. While some believe legal action might help prove a point or restore a tarnished image, the truth is that lawsuits often invite deeper scrutiny. They open doors to more questions, more opinions, more judgment. And when the details of that lawsuit don't quite align with what the public witnessed or remembers, things get even more complicated. Sympathy begins to wane. Support transforms into skepticism. This isn't about questioning the validity of a woman's discomfort or experience. It's about the contrast between personal perception and collective memory, and the audience's ability to recognize when a legal maneuver feels more like a reputation rescue mission than a pursuit of justice. Blake's move, intentional or not, appears to some as a calculated attempt to regain control of a shifting narrative. But when the strategy doesn't land, when people feel like they're being manipulated rather than confided in, it often backfires. And so, the criticism grows. The spotlight tightens. Every action becomes loaded with implication. Every misstep amplified. Since the incident at the donut shop, a moment that quickly spiraled into a tabloid-feeding frenzy, Blake has reportedly been extremely cautious. She's aware now, perhaps more than ever, that anything she does could be twisted, misunderstood, or used against her. One insider claims she and Ryan are yearning for simpler times, for the comfort and stability they once took for granted. They're said to be longing for the days when life felt normal, when career wins, family moments, and quiet weekends weren't constantly filtered through a lens of public judgment. As the lawsuit escalates, the source explains, Blake and Ryan have been reflecting deeply on how much their world has changed. They're trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. It's a daunting task. Ryan had been riding high on the success of his 2024 Deadpool release, his name soaring across headlines for all the right reasons. Blake, too, was thriving in her own right, seemingly grounded in family and flourishing professionally. But all of that now feels distant. Whether the courts ultimately rule in their favor or not, this battle with Justin Baldoni will leave lasting effects on their reputation, their relationships, and likely their careers. And as for friendships once thought unbreakable, like the one Blake reportedly shared with Taylor Swift, that chapter may already be closing. Longing for the serenity of life before all of this, Blake has reportedly been reaching out, attempting to reconnect with friends who've drifted away or become entangled in the fallout. There's a quiet urgency in her efforts, a hope that by repairing these strained relationships, she might also rebuild some sense of balance. Amid the chaos, she's craving normalcy, a return to rhythm, to stability, to mornings that begin without dread and evenings free from damage control. But in the world of celebrity, normal doesn't come easily, especially not after public missteps. Nearly every reputable lawyer, PR strategist, or talent agent will agree on one thing. In the midst of a media firestorm, the worst decision you can make is to escalate it with a lawsuit. It's not just ineffective. It tends to magnify the scrutiny, dragging private wounds into the public arena where judgment is fast and forgiveness slow. This lawsuit, in hindsight, was not a path toward peace. It was a reactionary move, a grasp at control during a time when their public image was slipping through their fingers. Instead of softening the spotlight, it intensified it. People began to look closer, not just at the headlines, but at the moments in between. Suddenly, every move Blake and Ryan made felt suspicious, calculated, open for dissection. And now, with the benefit of hindsight, and perhaps a growing sense of regret, they seem to want it all to disappear, to rewind the clock, to reclaim. The version of life that existed before the curtain was pulled back. But the truth, as it often is, isn't so easily edited. The decisions that led them here weren't made in a vacuum. They were deliberate, and they had consequences. Every single day we are faced with choices: how we treat others, how we nurture or neglect our relationships, how we operate in business, and how we handle power. Ethics, kindness, professionalism, these are conscious decisions. You either lean into them or walk away from them. And at some point, both Blake and Ryan chose a direction. Why they made those choices, we may never fully know. But what's clear now is the cost. Insiders say this wasn't just about making a movie. This was a strategic play, a vision, a plan to ascend as Hollywood's next great power couple, mirroring the legacy of Demi Moore and Bruce Willis in their prime. 2 stars, 2 films, both reaching the top. Blake and Ryan would share producer credits, co-lead public conversations, and command dual successes side by side. And for a brief moment, they achieved that. But the price of that ambition may still be unfolding. If we're being honest, this may have been the direction they were always heading. Behind the polished smiles and curated public images, there was an undercurrent of competition, of silent rivalry, particularly with Scarlett Johansson, who had recently stepped into the director's chair with a powerful documentary collaboration alongside Wayfair. It was a bold, sophisticated move that drew attention across the industry. At the same time, Margot Robbie was flying high with Barbie, a cultural juggernaut that Blake had reportedly set her sights on the year before, but Blake never got that chance. That wasn't her film, it was Margot's. And sources close to both actresses suggest they've never shared an easy rapport. There's history there, creative tension, maybe even unresolved resentment. So when Barbie soared, Blake was watching from the sidelines, and that stings. It's easy to believe she longed for her own Barbie moment, a cinematic triumph that would solidify her legacy and redefine her brand. Not just as a star, but as a creative force. That desire may still burn quietly beneath the surface. The comparisons, the career trajectories, the subtle jabs passed around industry circles, all of it contributes to a kind of pressure most people never see. But when you strip it all back, the truth is much simpler. Blake and Ryan are here because of their own choices. No one else made those decisions for them. Whatever regrets they now carry, those belong to them alone. What stands out most, though, is the strange inconsistency in the public narrative. One moment, it's said that Blake's friendship with Taylor Swift has disintegrated. In the next, there are whispers that things have been patched up and the bond remains intact. But let's not forget, Taylor Swift is surrounded by some of the sharpest PR minds in the business. If there was even a hint of risk, if aligning herself with Blake would jeopardize her own carefully managed image, she wouldn't touch it. In Hollywood, public perception is everything. Actors and actresses are more than performers. They are living, breathing brands. And brands can't afford controversy. When someone becomes a lightning rod for scandal, those around them scatter. That's not cruelty. It's survival in a cutthroat industry. If you look closely, how many of Blake's friends have come forward to defend her, to stand by her side? The silence is deafening. What makes it even more striking is the contrast with how Taylor responded in the past. When Kesha spoke out against her producer, alleging harassment and assault, Taylor didn't hesitate. She offered support, publicly and privately. That's the kind of loyalty and courage people remember. So it's telling that no such display has been made for Blake. In the end, this isn't about rivalry or career envy or even friendships lost. It's about integrity, how people treat others when no one's watching, and how that shapes what the world sees when the spotlight hits. Blake and Ryan's story isn't over yet, but the chapter they're living through now was written by their own hand. Taylor Swift has remained noticeably absent throughout all of this, her silence speaking louder than any statement could. Aside from a lukewarm gesture of support from the cast of the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, Blake's former co-stars have kept a respectful but telling distance. And even that support feels half-hearted. No one's rushing to the front lines to defend her, no matter how nostalgic the connection might be. In Hollywood, silence is rarely accidental. The friends who once championed her have gradually stepped back, their absence growing more conspicuous as the details become harder to ignore. No one in the entertainment industry wants to risk becoming collateral damage. Careers, reputations, and future collaborations are always at stake. Being seen as controversial, even by association, can lead to projects drying up, brand deals being reconsidered, and once open doors quietly closing. Behind the scenes, it's not just gossip that causes concern, it's perception. If studios even suspect that hiring her might lead to internal conflict, power struggles, or disruptive behavior on set, it becomes a risk they're unwilling to take. Whether the allegations are true or not becomes secondary to how the narrative plays out in public. Rumors of production sabotage, threats to withdraw from promotional obligations, or spiraling budgets because of on-set drama, that's not just bad PR. It's a business liability. And while I'm not an insider within the Hollywood machine, common sense suggests this. If the impression exists that working with her could derail an entire production, industry leaders will take note. Directors and producers won't openly blacklist, but decisions get made in quiet rooms. Scripts will pass her by, roles will be rewritten, opportunities will subtly shift elsewhere. Could she recover from all of this? Perhaps. Redemption arcs aren't impossible, but they require reflection, humility, and often stepping away before stepping back in. What won't work is doubling down, deflecting blame, or dragging the legal process into a public spectacle. Then there's Ryan. His legal team recently filed a response to Justin's lawsuit, and let's just say it raised more eyebrows than it answered. The tone was dismissive, the logic convoluted, and the argument leaned more on smoke and mirrors than on actual substance. What stood out the most, though, was how carefully he sidestepped the previous insinuations of predatory behavior. That part, once emphasized, was suddenly dialed back, almost like they realized it was a line they never should have crossed. Now, instead of maintaining their earlier narrative, Ryan's strategy seems to have shifted toward distraction, redirecting, attention, trying to poke holes in unrelated areas rather than directly addressing the heart of the accusations. But at this point, the public is paying attention, and no amount of legal tap dancing is going to rewrite what people have already seen or felt. At this point, Ryan Reynolds' legal team is calling for the case to be dismissed. But to be completely honest, none of their arguments seem likely to succeed. The logic feels thin, the defense scattered, and the strategy increasingly transparent. But what's even more fascinating is how the story has evolved from clever legal maneuvering to something that resembles psychological warfare. Do you remember how, just last week, we discussed Ryan's motion to dismiss? In that motion, he claimed, the plaintiffs failed to identify critical details, such as who exactly heard the alleged defamatory statements when they were made, and the precise time and context. It almost felt like he was daring them, baiting them, to come forward with those details. Well, they did. In their response, they revealed that the comments were made during a phone call with a man named Danny Greenberg. They even included the specific date of the call. But instead of engaging with the substance of this clarification, Ryan's legal team fired back with a technical rebuttal buried in a footnote. It stated that while the opposition now claims Reynolds made the statement, to Greenberg, the first amended complaint doesn't mention Greenberg at all. Nor does it describe any phone call, its contents, or even where Greenberg was located during that call. In other words, he challenged them to name the source. And when they did, He argued that the original complaint lacked the information. It's a classic legal sleight of hand. Distract, redirect, deflect. What matters isn't whether it's true, only whether it's admissible. This isn't just a legal defense. It's a deliberate tactic to confuse the narrative, to invalidate new information by clinging to old technicalities. It doesn't feel like a man defending himself. It feels like a team trying to outwit the system. And frankly, the approach is starting to feel more manipulative than methodical. It also raises the question, who is really driving this strategy? Because this doesn't sound like Ryan Reynolds. The tone, the tactics, the subtle gaslighting, it all seems crafted by lawyers who are less interested in truth than in winning. Look at how they continue shifting the goalposts. First, they demand a named source. Once the name is given, they argue the name wasn't in the original documents. It's a loop designed not to reveal truth, but to bury it under process. And there's more. Ryan's team is now distancing themselves from the most inflammatory part of the entire case, the predator accusation. In his first motion, the term sexual predator was referenced repeatedly. Entire pages were devoted to defending its use. But now, that phrase has all but vanished from the response. Instead, his lawyers argue that any references to predator are simply unactionable opinion, protected speech under current legal standards. The change in tone is not subtle. It's a strategic retreat. What was once central is now downplayed. The aggressive stance has turned into legal minimalism, and his defense is leaning heavily on vague interpretations of free speech protections. Ryan's latest argument even claims that 6 of the 7 plaintiffs weren't defamed at all, as though he's slowly carving away at the case, piece by piece, until there's nothing left to hold on to. It's not an apology. It's not even a firm denial. It's a calculated redirection, and perhaps that's the most unsettling part, because what we're witnessing isn't just a man trying to clear his name. It's a system, polished, professional, and cold, trying to win by any means necessary. This isn't about justice. It's about leverage, power, reputation. As the case continues, one thing becomes clearer with every filing. The truth may be in there somewhere, but finding it is going to take more than just reading between the lines. It's going to take persistence, patience, and a public unwilling to let theatrics stand in for answers. Separate parts of the FAC, they also try effort to force WME to drop Baldoni, but neither the opposition nor the first amended complaint clearly outlines which undisclosed facts may have been implied by Ryan Reynolds' statements. But here's the thing. Legally, they don't have to. Under the framework of civil procedure, a complaint doesn't need to present every single piece of evidence up front. It's not a full trial. It's a notice. It simply needs to provide enough substance to justify moving the case forward. And in this case, it seems that Belden and the Wayfair parties have done exactly that. Right now, it feels like Reynolds' legal team doesn't truly expect to win the motion to dismiss. Instead, they appear to be crafting a final attempt, a last-ditch impression to sway the judge's perception. They know that after this round, the judge will have seen 2 responses from Ryan's side and only 1 from Belden's. It's all about shaping perception, not proving facts, but here's where things begin to unravel. There's a section in the latest response that is so poorly written and logically incoherent that it raises serious questions about the integrity of their argument. Listen to this carefully. Ryan's legal team claims that he obtained internal communications between Wayfair representatives allegedly sent by someone named Stephanie Jones. According to them, these communications somehow disprove the claim that Reynolds orchestrated a smear campaign. But even on the surface, this argument collapses under its own weight. First, nowhere in the complaint, nowhere do the plaintiffs claim that Reynolds had access to those internal materials at the time he made the original defamatory statements. That is a critical point. His comments, especially the ones referring to someone as a sexual predator, came well before any mention of Stephanie Jones or any alleged communications surfaced. The timing simply doesn't add up. Second, the notion that these materials disprove a smear campaign isn't backed by evidence. In fact, it's directly contradicted by the communications themselves. It's a bold, sweeping assertion without foundation, a conclusory statement dressed up to look like fact. What Ryan's lawyers appear to have done is pulled together 2 entirely separate parts of the first amended complaint, 2 threads that were never linked, and forced them into a single muddled argument. They're suggesting that Reynolds had access to insider information before he made the Predator remarks, and that this somehow absolves him of any coordinated attempt to discredit the Wayfair parties. But here's the truth. The plaintiffs never alleged that Reynolds received any of Stephanie Jones's communications until after he had already made the controversial statements. In fact, the entire concept of a smear campaign, at least from Blake and Ryan's side, didn't even surface until months later, around August. So how could Reynolds possibly have used materials that, by their own timeline, hadn't even entered the picture? It's not just misleading, it's careless. It reflects either a fundamental misunderstanding of the complaint or a willful attempt to manipulate its context. Either way, it undercuts the credibility of their argument, and yet, the legal team continues to push the narrative that the Wayfair parties have somehow admitted to orchestrating an untraceable campaign. But let's be clear, no such admission exists in the complaint. None. What we're seeing is a strategic misrepresentation of the facts, one that's either desperate or dangerously calculated. This isn't just about defending reputation anymore. It's about distortion, misdirection, legal gymnastics designed to distract from the central issue, which is whether defamatory statements were made and whether they caused real harm. The closer we examine Ryan's defense, the more it resembles a carefully constructed illusion. There's a flurry of words, citations, and rebuttals, but very little substance. The core claims remain largely unanswered, and the timelines don't align. At this stage, it's not about who's louder, it's about who's honest. And if the case does proceed to trial, one thing is certain: the truth will no longer be filtered through legal posturing. It will have to stand on its own. I honestly don't know who crafted this response, but I can tell you it's one of the most poorly written legal arguments I've seen in a long time. When Wayfair presented their opposition to the motion to dismiss, they introduced a significant issue: the idea that Ryan Reynolds' company might be liable under California's law of negligent interference. According to this legal framework, Reynolds and his team might have failed in their duty to protect the integrity of the film, a duty that California law imposes on individuals in similar positions. In order for this claim to move forward, the plaintiffs must prove that Reynolds' actions were negligent in a way that interfered with the film's production. California law requires them to meet certain criteria, a series of prongs, that establish negligence. Essentially, Wayfair argued that because Ryan had been contracted to promote the film, his actions, specifically the defamatory statements he made, caused real harm to the project. In this context, the argument is that Reynolds, as an agent of the film, owed a duty of care not to recklessly damage the public image of the film, its director, its lead actor, or its studio. It's a compelling argument, one that hinges on whether Reynolds' actions violated the trust placed in him by his contract. The legal claim is rooted in the idea that such a duty of care can arise from a statute, a contract, or simply the nature of the work itself. But here's where it gets interesting. Wayfair's legal team goes through all these different prongs, building their case. They claim that under California law, Reynolds had a clear responsibility to avoid harming the project. And they argue that at a minimum, they should be given the chance to revise their complaint and further solidify the existence of this duty of care. Now, this is where things start to feel like a game of legal chess. The Wayfair parties, though, don't just stop there. They talk about the possibility of amending their lawsuit, citing their contract as the foundation for their claim. They want to add weight to the case, emphasizing the contractual obligation that Reynolds had to the project. But here's the catch: Reynolds' defense is relentless. He concedes, in a rather unsettling way, that yes, California law does require a plaintiff to establish a duty of care. But then, and this is key, he immediately points out that the first amended complaint, FAC, doesn't directly address this crucial